A $95 billion industry with thousands of fans, dedicated communities and a culture more active than any other. I'm of course talking about video games. No other industry has capitalized on the rapid pace of evolving technology. From the 8-bit days of CRT TVs to our modern 4K screens today, platformers, 3D platformers, first-person shooters, open-world games, indie games, virtual reality games, procedurally generated games, esports, and a rather stigmatized backlash. Now, the assumption that games are a purely solidarity experience is mostly misguided, but it's easy to see it that way with the proliferation of online multiplayer. But it seemed that local, face-to-face social experience was looking to be slowly dying out. When arcades began to significantly reduce in scale and quantity, gaming hangout spots seemed few and far between, until one place, based on a pun, came along. If you've been actively participating with games culture in London, then you've likely heard of one of the loading bars, a place that houses a culture that embraces all the very nerdy stuff that brings them together under these roofs. But how did the space come to be? How did one guy with practically no business experience contribute so much to the gaming scene in London? How did loading create a culture of play?
Loading was something I set up in 2010, and then it was 2014 that I teamed up with my business partner Alice, and we've been doing this for 5 years in London and Brighton since. So my degree was in film studies, which is good but not so useful for like full-time work. I was working as a chef at the time and looked at all the different stuff I was into, what I knew I could do, and saw 8-bit cafe in Japan and thought that seemed like quite an interesting thing to do. So I saved up some money, set up somewhere in Cornwall, and then the plan was always do that for a year and see how badly or how well it went. I didn't really make any money out of that, but there was always some other reason to keep going. Like something interesting happened, or like a company would send something.
All right, guys, drink up. Time at the bar.
The cocktails came around because I was sat in Cornwall when it was the winter. You'll have a day where I know it snows, it's dead. So I knew that I guess certain places were never going to come to Cornwall, or people wouldn't write about it or mention it. So I noticed, like with 8-bit Cafe, they'd done these kind of cocktail things. I had like a designer and a friend that was a photographer, and we talked about what had been done before and where we thought we could do something a bit different and make a menu that linked in with the games a bit more and looked like a bit more stylish. And it was through Capcom seeing that menu and some of the work we did. They just asked, pick a game, you can do whatever you want, don't worry about it. I just pitched them like, okay, cool, can I do Resident Evil? Is that all right? They were really nice just to say like, go for it. And that's how that happened. It worked really well to like spread the word, I guess, about what we were doing. It was a nice way of us being able to make something that went wider than just the people that could come in the cafe at the time.
After 2 years running in Falmouth on the smaller scale, it was time to set its sights on the gaming industry capital. But without the funds to achieve this, James turned to Indiegogo in order to gather up the funds to build a dedicated space in London, which unfortunately fell short of the $15,000 goal, only reaching $15,000 by the end. But even then, that figure was still enough to get the ball rolling and drum up interest in order to get the full figure needed through investments. In March 2013, Loading had its first full London opening up in Soho, beginning as a pop-up shop, but eventually having a full opening the following month. But even with a successful launch, sustaining the business for the long term in central London became a whole different question.
Yeah, so we did the stuff in Soho for a year, which was me teaming up with another place. It was cool to be in Soho, but the rent is insanely expensive. That's why after a year, the guys I was doing that with wanted to go and do other things that would make them infinitely more money, whereas I wanted to carry on doing game stuff. It was through that I ended up meeting Alice. As we announced like we needed to move from Soho, Alice got in touch because she was invested in that pub, but she wanted someone to come in and maybe make it a bit more gaming related, because it was just like a nice bar before. And that's how that came together, where it was easier for us to do more game things. It was a bit of a trade-off that it was much further out. So Central was great for certain reasons, whereas Dalston was a bit of an unknown, but it meant we had time to let it develop, and it meant it could grow of its own accord, which is how we started hosting stuff like Marioki and like meetups, game jams, develop that community over time rather than throw ad money at it or like some marketing campaign.
It may have been the cocktails and the games that got people through the door, but just being a space where you could drink and play was one reason to come. Another reason to come down was the many events being held, from game launches, E3 viewing parties, and even weird karaoke in a way. But how did it become a space for all these weird and wacky things?
So I'm Anne Scantlebury. I'm a presenter and producer of One Life Left, which is a radio show about video games, and I'm a co-host of Marioke. Marioke is video game karaoke where the songs have been rewritten to be about all your favourite video games. So it's the best pop songs mashed up with the best video games. As One Life Left, me, Steve and Simon have been doing events at Nottingham Game City for many, many years since it started. We've done things like a chiptune evening, we did stand-up, and we were sort of brainstorming a list of pun names for events that we could do in the future. And one of them that came up was One Song Left. And we were sort of thinking, well, what could One Song Left be? Came up with this idea for it to be chiptune versions of karaoke songs, but we sort of tested that out and it was really, really bad. So we altered it back to it's karaoke, but we rewrite the lyrics and make them about video games. So after we had done the initial couple at Game City and then at GDC, we knew Jimmy, and I think Steve was chatting to him about, oh, maybe we should do Marioke at Loading. This is when Loading was still in Soho and the venue wasn't quite right for it. Then Loading moved to Dalston. Jimmy got back in touch with us and said, guys, I want to start running regular nights here. Would you be interested in trying out Marioke here?
Something like Marioke, that's where you're giving things a lot more time rather than just, all right, like if the first one's rubbish, we'll just never do it again. It's like you can do it 4 or 5 times and make sure it has time to grow and become something.
I think we sort of would have done it once to see if it worked, and it did. And yeah, we continued after that. We always try to run Marioke as being a completely inclusive event. It doesn't matter if you're on stage and singing or if you're at the back and you're a bit shy, you should feel as much part of Marioke as the person next to you. So we want it to be something that is for the people that are there. It doesn't work if it's just the 3 of us on the stage singing. It should be like massively about the audience participation. So the thing about having it at Loading is that it's a hub. It's a hub where people already go for games. They know that Loading is about community. They know that Loading is a welcoming space for them. And so bringing people into Loading to do Marioke, it's a really nice space as well. It's small, so you can get that feeling of like, yeah, everyone here is looking at me because there's like a direct focus onto the stage. We've tried it in places which have been a lot bigger, and unless you have a big crowd that matches that space, it feels a bit empty. So I think the way that Loading is set up and that we run it there really, really works. I think that Loading's culture, the way that it brings people there for games, it is a games hub in London, is really good. And I hope that the way that we run Marioke lets people know that they are welcome and that you don't have to be the best singer, you don't have to even know anything about video games, you can just get on stage and be a rock star.
My name is Gav Murphy, and up until recently I did work for IGN, but I jacked it all in to go start a company with 2 of my best mates playing video games for a living, just generally fucking about for people's enjoyment. So one of the things that I did early on with Loading was a Rocket League night. So it was basically around the time that Rocket League was just kicking off. Everybody had it. We were playing it constantly at IGN. So we had an idea with Jimmy to do a Rocket League night. And basically we designed this like tournament structure. We invited people in to sort of register a team, and then they went up against other teams then. We even had like this like little charity shield thing. The idea was like your name would be on the shield like every time you won a tournament, which was really funny. Like I love watching sport in pubs. I'd never seen anything like that for a video game. It was bonkers. It was like the World Cup final in here when people were going off.
Right there. That's bad news. And that's a goal. Ubisoft with the opening goal. 4-13, still plenty to play for.
So the Free House of Horror event was something that we've been talking to Jimmy about for like actual years. So we had the idea to basically do out the bar like it was Moe's Tavern. Invite loads of people down, do like silly things like we did like a trivia competition. We did karaoke versions of some of the best Simpsons songs. We had this crazy photo booth And people really dressed up, man. Like, they were about 12 Ned Flanders, and on the night, they didn't know each other. But I've got this amazing photo where I went downstairs and all these Ned Flanders were just sitting around playing a board game. They never met each other before, but they came to our event and then were like best friends afterwards. It was the funniest thing I've ever seen. And then they all had like photos in the photo booth and stuff like that. It was just so funny, man. We're definitely gonna do it this year.
While Loading have done plenty of events over the years, their one recurring staple has been their E3 viewings. The biggest and busiest week in the gaming calendar plays host to a set of livestream viewings where people come along to stay up at an absurdly late hour seeing all the announcements. And believe it or not, it all started with an angry rant from former gaming editor of The Guardian, Q Stewart.
Like the E3 stuff, I'd wanted to do viewing parties. Obviously PR companies used to send out press, that was how it worked. One year, I think the company that would normally have like covered their travel to go out, because it was the year like YouTube sort of broke through, so they decided we're not going to send press, we're going to send influencers. It just then meant Keith wasn't going to go because The Guardian weren't going to send someone, so he had this idea, cool, we'll do our own like E3 thing, and it became bigger than it probably had any right to be with Sony and different companies. Like we had a few exclusives, things shown, but it was again about trying to do something with like community in mind. No one was really doing that for any like commercial reason.
Last year on a completely different stage, we showed off new drinks, new upgrades and even a whole new venue. This year we wanted to go even bigger, so we've doubled the video team and hired a dashing host. And that's me.
I hosted the Server Bar E3 sort of unofficial conference. Jimmy, he kind of set that all up and had me doing little gags in between pre-recorded inserts and stuff. It was really fun actually, I really enjoyed it.
It's like drinking a fucking tattoo.
I'm kind of familiar, I know the guys from IGN a little bit, so I've worked on IGN products. I'm one of their voiceovers and I occasionally do a Let's Play every now and again. So Jimmy knew me from that kind of circle.
So that's the main shift from what we did, say, in like the first year in Donaldson versus now is there's like a small amount of money to do the stuff I get put down on accounts as like dumb marketing ideas. So be it bringing in Pete to host like our own E3 conference and make videos, that was us doing things that fans would do. Like it seemed like a cool thing to do because we had those contacts and people.
While Loading is predominantly a space for people to play and drink, before the doors are open to the public, it acts as a space for game developers to make games, including one game influenced by the very area it's being made in.
So my name is Vegard. I'm a developer and I make indie games basically, and we use the loading bar as our office space during the day when it's not open to the public. So we started here actually before it was loading bar. It was just called Scenario Bar at the time. We were just sitting discussing with a bunch of indies how we could find a place to work from, because we were all getting tired of working from home or in various cafes. It just so happened that Alice, who is one of the people that run this place, was around, and we asked her, would it be okay if we just sit here and work? And she was like, yep, sure, no problem. She handed us the keys. I didn't really know her very well at the time, but it was she was quite trusting, and it's been pretty good since then. So it's called Hipster Cafe, and it's a game where you run and manage a hipster cafe. There's a lot of interesting cafes that have opened and closed around here, and they have certain tendencies that we've discovered. For example, there's one place called Donaldson that opened just down the road here, which is a adult soft play area with ball pits and champagne and so on. So obviously there's a ball pit in the game where you can use to entertain the hipsters. Very much art imitating life in this particular scenario. We're also hipsters ourselves because we're sitting around in East London and working off of laptops in cafes, and we're kind of laughing at ourselves a little bit as well in the game. So.
I think the cool thing about Loading Bar is there's somewhere for people who are into video games to go and chill out. Like, there's a couple of places that I've been to that are like board game bars and video game bars, and they kind of do it in a really I don't know, like quite a formal way. Like you go in, you like book a time, you sit down, you get the console for a set amount of time, you get a board game for the set amount of time and things like that. Whereas Load-In feels like a pub that happens to have video games and board games and stuff like that going on as well, which I really, really like.
And like my experience is that there's a real tight community of gamers, board gamers, people who are interested in geek culture that go down and they have a lovely time. It's such a warm place to experience that side of things. The whole place is just lined with video games and arcade machines and mainly board games as well, just reams and reams of board games that people could just get involved in. You just see people who would never normally game getting involved while they're just socialising.
Well, there's a huge games community in London anywhere, and there, has been for a long time. But I think having a place to go, games can make you feel quite separate because you often play them by yourself, or you just play them in small groups around, different friends' houses or whatever. Like, they're amazing. They're great things to do for yourselves, and obviously you can play online and things. But I think having a physical space which can bring people together, where you can either play games or not. You can just go there and be in an environment where you're around people that aren't going to be snarky because you like video games. I think it's really good having a physical space where they can relax, they can play games, they can engage in different events. I love all the board game stuff there. It's so nice.
I think obviously it's a meeting place for a lot of the people in the industry. Everyone kind of comes to one of the loading bars, and so like sooner or later you bump into everyone that's in the games industry in London.
People obviously like boozing because that is good, but people also really, really like playing video games, and rather than it being like one or the other, you can come and play video games and stuff, but also like they have some of the events that we do and things like that. Jimmy is so open to having just silly events and things like that, like dressing the bar up like most happen and like turning into the World Cup final for Rocket League and things like that.
And obviously I used to go to Loading Bar and still do go to Loading Bar quite a lot. Jimmy serves a mean limoncello. I do like a limoncello at the end of the evening, and I love those places. There's such unique drinking experiences, and the whole company's just great.
I think actually having somebody like Jimmy who understands the community as well, I think it's great that he sort of has the mind for where the community wants it to be.
Like, the thing that still amazes me is that people know it. As we've done more and more bits, so whatever it might be, like a cocktail then goes on The Guardian, like there's certain amazing stuff that shouldn't really have happened that has, but still the thing that's the biggest kick for me is that someone will message me that they're talking to someone in Manchester and their friend mentioned, like, oh, he was talking about the bars you're involved with. That they're known in that way is amazing to me, because it's like, from me growing up being just into games to then have it where the people that made those games, like Martin Hollis has come in from Karaoke and obviously helped make GoldenEye. We've got GoldenEye in the bar, so there was a bit where during the evening he was just stood in the background watching 4 people randomly play GoldenEye, quietly nodding to himself. And then those people playing that have no idea, like one of the main people that made it is stood behind them watching them play it. But that's the stuff that has the most impact for me. That's where it leads into having those people that are on the E3 stage. It's like, oh sweet, they're like a regular in the bar. Game still has a problem with that, where you can watch a Twitch stream, you can see it online, but the impact for most game stuff is like, you want to see it, you want to play it, you want to interact with it, and getting the fans of a game in front of those things is still our main goal going forward. That hopefully you'll know if you come to one of our bars, you'll have a nice chance to, if you're interested in games, meet those people. To be part of that scene is way more than I ever thought it would be, because it was just, I wanted to put games in a space and ideally not go bankrupt. It was always the initial thing, and to be able to do things like someone has a game signed and do stuff that is way bigger than anything to do with me is the best part of doing it, and why we still do. We want to make more of those stories and help more of that stuff happen.